Welcome, everybody. We really appreciate you joining us for this TPS Eastern Region Conference. Today's subject is placing primary sources using story maps to connect space, place, and time. Georgeanne, if you go on to the next slide, we are pleased that you can join us today. We have with us the Virginia Geographic Alliance. They are actually a TPS Eastern Region grant, and it's headed up by Chris Bunin at Albemarle High School in Charlottesville, Virginia, and Georgeanne Hribar from Old Dominion. She's technically retired, but still teaches at Old Dominion. And we're pleased to have them join us to talk about their project, placing primary sources using story maps to connect space, place, and time. So I'll turn it over to Chris and Georgeanne.
Here's our cover slide. Ready to go, Chris?
I am ready. Thank you. Okay, thank you all for joining us. Today we're going to walk you through how we have partnered with TPS Eastern to develop a series of story maps that place primary sources in the context of where they happened as well as when they happened. When we think about the teaching of history and the teaching of humanities, we often emphasize the temporal with less emphasis on the spatial. So if you think about it, every event has both a temporal and spatial tag. The pictures you see in front of you, one is are the trenches at the fall of Dien Bien Phu that indicated the end of French Indochina. If I showed this picture to my students, they might think that I'm sitting on the western front of Europe. However, when I bring in geospatial technologies or a map and put a pin or a point to where that happened, it does bring context to where it happened, as well as raises new questions of where, why there, and then really, why should we care? So our goal with this project was to introduce the use of geospatial technologies and weave that with solid teaching with primary source methodology to provide resources that have teachers using both GIS and teaching with primary sources techniques when they're teaching about key events in U.S. history. So when you think about why would we bring story maps and GIS together, we thought of our audience, the practicing classroom teacher today. We want to make resources that would make teaching more effective and more efficient and would match up with the classroom realities of most of our classrooms today. Our students are digital natives, and our teachers are very busy and need help and support in doing things more efficiently. Another reason why we picked geospatial technologies is because it is regularly recognized as a high-need area of job growth. It is also recognized as one of the fastest growing industries in the United States. So what's nice is the framework we call it here in Virginia is the iSTEM framework. How can we weave or integrate STEM technologies into non-STEM classes to really truthfully help grow the ranks and understandings of digital research? So when we talk about GIS, if I say geographic information systems, I sometimes get glazed looks by folks in the audience. But really, GIS is pretty simple. It's a lot of the techniques and skills we've been using for years. It's just with a new tool. G represents geography. Think of any map that you've used in your classroom. I represents information that is being mapped. Think of an Excel spreadsheet or a Google sheet or a table of information. The system is when we connect the information to the map and how we can interact with it to either shrink what's being shown or reduce what's being shown or increase what's being shown. It provides a level of interactivity and analysis that often helps students better understand how to really truthfully read and analyze maps and information.
Okay, as a geographer, it is a geographic information system, and I think everything's geographic because everything happens somewhere. Location may have a positive or negative influence on the outcome of a historical event. Do you think Cornwallis envisioned getting trapped at Yorktown? And why did Virginia have such a large slave population? And how did the location affect the outcome of historical maps? We hope to convince you today that online maps are more than location. They're rich sources of information, and our teacher authors carefully chose the information to complete the story that the sources had. We're going to view a few examples and ways to maximize learning from these story maps. So our goals for today, we're going to share the collection and show you where we have hidden the lesson plans and story maps. And we're going to take a ramble through a variety of story maps so that you can increase your skill in seeing all the tools that are embedded in the maps and apps. And our piece de resistance is the item details page. So if you look at a story map and you say, oh, I like that source, the bibliographic link in the item details page will let you download just that source for your classroom.
So when in a moment, Georgeanne's going to take you to the collection to show you how to interact with it. But to give you a little background to our grant involves supporting the training of 6 Virginia classroom teachers to learn how to use WebGIS and how to make web maps and then translate them into story maps. Once we had a weekend of training, the teachers then picked 2 benchmark topics to frame a story map around. They conducted authentic research with the online stacks at the Library of Congress. They looked through existing maps that could support the story they were telling, and they started mapping out their story map. And along the way, we had online meetings with myself and Georgeanne to provide the technical support so they didn't feel like they were lost. We wanted their stories and their expertise of how to do this in the classroom, and we'd make sure that the technology was taken care of on our end. At the end of the day, you're going to see 11 maps. That is because life happens during these projects, and one of our teachers had to step away for personal reasons. So while our goal was to have 12 best practice story maps, we have 11. You'll see when Georgeanne takes you through the page, we had a teacher explore the evolution of political parties and the regional shifts that occurred and created a story map. We had a teacher explore World War I and the story of the American Expeditionary Forces and looked really at the home front as well as the transportation and movement to the Western Front. We had a teacher explore America's journey westward, which is like one of those ideal interplays between space, place, and time. We had a teacher place the civil rights in time and place from Reconstruction up to present day. And Georgeanne, correct me, does it go all the way back to the founding, or does it start at
we might have one slide of the founding.
Okay. Yeah, so it's civil. Yeah, so it's civil rights from Reconstruction to the present day. We had a teacher explore placing Cold War conflicts. This one matches nicely with world history and U.S. history. We had a teacher explore placing the progressives. So think of how often we generalize the progressive movement. This allows you to see how the progressive movement changed with place and time based on which region it occurred.
And there's more.
There are more. We had a teacher that explored U.S. global expansion. One that looks at placing U.S. immigration historically as well as looking at contemporary issues. Placing U.S. involvement in World War I with the Allied victory in Europe. The uneasy balance, stepping stones to war, looks at the difficulty of compromise that ultimately led to the American Civil War. And then World War II in the Pacific looks at the role of island hopping and interactively looks at what happened as your proximity to Japan got closer. And that's the collection that has been designed. And now I'm going to hand it off to Georgeanne to walk you through the site, and you're more than welcome to follow along at home.
Okay, so on our site, we have an overview of the story map, the links to student materials, and I'm going to go live, and I can't talk and mouse at the same time. So here's our landing page. We have an introduction by Chris. These links are live, so you could send your students here, but have them click on the eye. And then we knew if the students went to the website, maybe they won't scroll down. So we've hidden the teacher materials. Now, if you're concerned about your students getting them, you can always just give them the link to the map. So as we go to the teacher site, there is a background overview of each of the story maps. And we're going to go to a page, and each story map got its own page with decorated sources. So here is the link to the Storymap. And any Storymap journal or Esri GIS map works best in Google Chrome. And we have student materials, and we provided them to you in 3 formats: Word, Google, and a PDF. The teacher materials and the lesson to the student guides. So all of those are included on the site. Okay, Chris is going to show us how you navigate a story map. I'm going to move this over. There we go. Oops, maybe not. Okay, let me close this other.
Okay, all right. So as Georgeanne brings up one of the story maps we're going to walk you through, to let you know that the software we used is ArcGIS Online. It's provided by a software company called Esri, and any school in the United States can gain a site license for their school free of charge. Once you learn how to make web maps, you have a number of options to make story maps, which are essentially web apps. As Georgeanne always likes to remind me, layers make maps, maps make apps. Somebody asked a question about what's the size for a typical story map. It's all stored online, so really all you need is online access and a web browser. Don't use Internet Explorer as Georgeanne shared, but use Chrome or Firefox. And so storage should not be an issue for it since it's online and Esri is providing you with the storage space. There were a number of story map apps we could choose from. The teachers invariably ended up choosing the Storymap journal. The map journal, as you'll see here, it's this image that you see in front of you. On the right-hand side is what we call the main stage. In this main stage, you can place primary sources, you can place web maps, you can place video, you can embed a website. You can even embed a story map within your story map. On the left-hand side, you will see the journaling side or the side window. The way that I describe to my kids, the left side is more like a word pad. This is where you can type information. On the right side is where you visualize things. Within the side pad, you can hyperlink things. There are a lot of widgets as you build it. So you'll see here that Georgeanne, Jared Morris, the teacher who designed this activity, wanted people to read a primary source. And if you want to read it closer, you can just click on the link to say, click to see the source in a better or a larger view.
The map.
Yeah. Within each of these story maps, we wanted to make sure that we spent time to do some geographic inquiry. Each one of these follow the inquiry arc, the 5-step arc of ask, acquire, explore, analyze, and act. Our actions were to deliver the story map and have students answer questions. So you'll see in this map, in order to understand the primary source, you have to understand what was going on geographically. And so this is census data from 1800 all the way up to 1860. So if we click through the different links on the sidebar, you'll see that you can see chronological visualization. So in addition to saying the United States spread, and as it spread, slavery spread as well, this actually shows you how it spread and also shows you that spreading means different things in different places. If we click on the 1861, with each one of these counties, information behind it is available for a student. So if a student was interested in Abbeville, South Carolina in 1860, they can click on this, and we formatted it so that in addition to having data, you have a pie chart to help visualize how enslaved or less enslaved were each county in the United States. So it allows you to also analyze geography at a variety of scales. So yeah, so that is, so notice you zoom in on the coast, and you'll find that 65% of that county had enslaved people. And so it shows you a lot of how it expanded, but also how the rates changed. So this story map, it works a lot like a PowerPoint. On the left-hand side, you have a button that looks like a house. That's your home button. And then each little radio button moving down the page moves you through the story map like a PowerPoint. And so on the website, in addition to having the story maps, we've provided you with a teacher's guide, student worksheets, and answer keys to help you have your students go through these activities. We've also provided it to you in 3 different formats: Word document, Google Doc, and I think is the other one PDF, Georgeanne? In PDF. So if you find that it's too much, like you just don't have the time to go through it all, you're more than welcome to customize the worksheets to best fit your reality.
Okay.
So Georgeanne, I think that moves to you.
Right. So many of the presentations go across time, so they're thematic. So this is about civil rights, and this particular one is in the Jim Crow era. So we have a map, but this is a special, it's a series of maps, and there's also another one that shows the Great Migration North. Notice that there are slides here. So for every piece of every place on the map, there are data behind it. So this particular one is showing the percent enslaved in 1860. But contrasting with that are the number of Jim Crow laws per state. So students can ask, gee, why aren't there very many in the North, and why are there so many in the South? In addition, the map shows in our pop-out the different types of Jim Crow laws. And then in the third slide, I was curious, is like saying, okay, there's a lot of Jim Crow laws, but one of the worst things that could happen in Jim Crow was being lynched. So this is a separate layer superimposed on the map showing the number of lynchings per state. And remember, causation does not necessarily equal, well, correlation does not equal causation. Oh, we're getting to go to the Nike site, Chris.
All right.
Okay, here we go. Whoops. Come on. Okay, pull to the right, pull to the left, just pull. Come on, Matt. Okay, so the Cuban Missile Crisis, we associated it with the Nike sites. And some of us remember quite nicely about the Nike sites. Oh, I don't want to do that. Nike is it's not an acronym. It is the type of missile that was in the United States. So we see missiles in Cuba, but we don't see any defensive missiles in the United States. So we're going to turn on our layer list, and we're going to take a look at the Nike sites.
Georgeanne, can I interrupt you for a second?
Sure.
So while Georgeanne starts to show you the layers here, this is another really key advantage to using GIS maps. So often what we see is what we get. It can even be an online map, but it's not customizable. If we're using paper atlases, what we see is what we get, and if it's out of date or something's incorrect, we might have to scribble it out, or we might have to even, what I like to say is to students is, hey, we're looking at how did industry change in 1820 to 1850, and you literally have the kids flipping the page from page 20 to page 50 in our textbooks, and I know many of you in the audience have done that before. What's nice with this is you can turn on and off the layers on the fly, and this takes a level of analysis up, and it's pretty simple and powerful. It is also a great differentiation tool so that you're going to help students not have to fumble through all of the information to really see what you want them to look at and analyze. So now, Georgeanne, back to you, and I'm sure for many people, I want to know more about these Nike missile sites.
Okay, so the Nike missile sites, and remember, Nike's the type of missile, were part of the Army Air Defense Command. And there are even some Nike sites that were in Europe. So the distribution is really important because look what we're protecting. I had a Nike site in my neighborhood, and I thought there was only one Nike site. So we're zooming into the Eastern region to see how Pittsburgh was protected. And the ring of sites around the place, just in case we need to use a defensive missile. And this one was there till 1963. So some of the questions kids could ask are, what part of the country was the most protected? Why? And we have, let's see how Washington, D.C., oh, they got bigger production. So this is interactive. So if we go back to Cuba, we can see where the missiles were placed in Cuba and if there would be any effective. So this particular thing Chris had said before is a web app embedded within our Storymap. Web app gives you the functionality to turn layers on and off and always to look at the legends.
Yeah. Can you go back up to the near Washington, Georgeanne, and Philadelphia?
Sure.
I saw the image of Philadelphia, and I haven't looked at it too much. It literally looks like the pattern of the stars around on one of our first flags. So I wonder if they did that by design. It really does look like one of our first flags. If you don't mind, George, I'm going to push pause on our presentation for just a minute just to address a couple of questions. A few of you have asked questions about where did this data come from. It was a collaborative effort between the teachers and Georgeanne, myself. We also had two other lead advisors on our program, Andy Mink at the National Humanities Center and Bob Morrill, who is one of the C3 authors for geography and really helped us make sure that we fit that framework. But between all of us, we were able to discuss what data is mappable and what data is a stretch. Georgeanne was a rock star finding certain data, but we also asked teachers to find the data because, again, if it can be placed into a table and it has a location, we can map it. The second question I saw pop up a couple of times is, can students do this, or can students gather data? Absolutely. That's why Esri has made this software free for any school, because students can map data. Students can make maps, and students can make story maps. At my own high school that I teach at, for our performance assessment at midterm, I believe I supported about 8 or 9 different classes that had said to students, I want you to make a story map on your topic, and it transcended disciplines. We had English classrooms using it, history classrooms, science classrooms, and many of our electives. So it's a real game changer and a transdisciplinary tool. So, Georgeanne, is this me or you?
Okay, you're going to talk about the ultimate mashup?
Yeah. So Georgeanne and I were joking around, and I put in GIS maps, story maps are the ultimate mashup. And what I mean by that is that think of all the different digital tools we're using these days, websites, interactive collector apps, a Google form, primary sources that are online. So what's really neat about this is that as the teachers develop these story maps, it literally would be like, imagine a jazz band just practicing and going ad lib and for a while, and we just started bouncing ideas like, what would make this section even better would be to make a secondary story map and put it in this story map. And so, for instance, looking at primary sources and how they shift across time, there's another story map app called a map tour. And so in this story map for placing immigration, we wanted to place what primary sources we have as to where they happen. And it's a very simple tool where we've just placed the primary source to a geographic location. And when you click on the item on the map or the item in the chronological timeline on the bottom, it moves you to that location. It provides you with the story map with a small caption, and then notice you can even click on the larger image to do primary source analysis. So in addition to looking at primary sources as a source, we're able to develop that historical and geographic context of where did this happen, and maybe even how close or how far was this from the next source that we're looking at.
And on the map tour itself, we have what we finally call the biggerize button, so that the source becomes much clearer, and we have to shut our biggerize button. But we also put in a hyperlink that will link to a full screen image so that the students would be able to see the subtlety of these particular political cartoons. So we're ready for the next slide, maybe.
Yeah.
I'll keep going through these.
Yeah, let's show them this slide, and then we'll zip back again.
Yeah, so this is the slide about filtering.
Yeah.
So to the live map.
Yeah. So a very common. So in my day job, I teach geography, history, and I'm fortunate to teach geospatial technologies to high school students. And I don't know why I told you that because I teach high school. You'd obviously know I teach high school students. But anyway, I had to say that. The saying that we like to say is, as a cartographer or a map maker, your job is to improve the signal and reduce the noise. And I think that's one thing that really drew us to this tool to use with primary sources, is how often and how messy history really is. History is messy. If we try to map out an entire war on one map, it's going to be messy. And it takes a while for students to develop geoliteracy and map reading skills to the point that they can separate those things out. So what we love about this GIS tool is we can pick and choose which widgets we want to use, and then we can use it to our advantage. So for instance, one technique that we love, in addition to turning on and off layers, which is a nice way to reduce the noise, is to use the filter tool. The filter tool allows you to choose what you want to see and what you don't want to see. So you can ask the map, please only show me the features that meet this criteria, and the rest of it disappears temporarily. So for instance, with this...
Hang on, Chris, for a bit.
Okay.
The one thing with this, theirs might be a series of 13 maps, so it's always good to check which map you're on. So this particular map is just showing immigration for 1900. So if Chris, when he gets ready to filter, wants to filter for 1950, he's not going to see anything on the 1900 map.
Yeah.
So go ask your questions, Chris.
All right. So, Georgeanne, I'm looking at this map, and I'm curious, what's the migration pattern for folks migrating from Canada?
And what year would you like to see them?
How about, what's it looking like in 1900?
Okay, so we have 1900, so I'm going to click for our filter. And you want Canada?
I do.
Oh, you do. Okay, so here's Canada. And the map didn't change because I have a button to click to execute the filter. And there they are.
Okay, I'm going to put my 6th grade hat on. I wonder why this pattern is this way, that so many people from Canada live there. What do you think, Georgeanne? Why do people from Canada in 1900, why are they migrating to these locations?
Because it's warmer.
That's right. Yeah, just a tad bit warmer.
And it's near the border. Is there another country you'd like for a different year?
I'm wondering where people from Ireland are migrating to in 1900. 1900 again, or do you want to move to a different one? 1950.
Okay, let's go to 1950.
1950, and show me Ireland.
So I need to remember to turn the layer on, but I also need to turn off the 1900 layer.
Right.
So 1951 Ireland.
Yeah.
And guess what?
Oh, they're okay then.
We're not in the majority in the state.
They were not in the majority. Can you show me migration patterns for Italy?
Let's try Italy.
Okay.
This one really surprised me.
Oh.
I'm not in New York and Ohio, but Louisiana? Okay, and then we can go all the way up to 2000 to see. We're not going to see anything unless we change the layer.
Yeah. So with this, notice. Hold on, we've got announcements going. Hold on.
Okay. So we do have a lot of flexibility in terms of tools, and in one of the exercises, there is a measurement tool. So we could have measured for our Canadians in terms of what was the furthest distance a Canadian got from the border of their country.
Yeah.
So I think that concludes our tour of the filtering.
Yeah, and I can tell you, kids really do enjoy the power of filtering out data. It helps them see patterns that they might not be seeing, but it also raises new questions that they might have. And sometimes the truth is we don't have the answer, but now that they're curious, we can say, let's go research that and find out if we can find some explanations for these patterns, because I don't know why this pattern is showing up right now.
And so this migration one goes all the way to the modern day. In case you're ever wondering what you're looking at, the legend is always in the upper right-hand corner. So this is showing migration in 2013. However, we have the beauty of an app which could automatically compare the percentages of foreign-born by state. So I should be getting an app opening, maybe. Click here to compare the percentages. And for some reason, it decided it wanted to go to California. So we see here that over time, there has been an increase in the percent of foreign born. Now let's go to Pennsylvania and click on it and see what a smaller percentage there is of foreign born, and the fact that it is represented here in a percent of the state's population, and here it is in raw numbers. Chris, are there any other states you might be interested in looking at? Oh, he's still probably muted.
You know, I'm back now. I just turned it off. Yeah, we were on an early release today, so a lot of things are going on. It's spring break. A question is, why don't we check out New York? Or I'm not sure we can find New York City, but let's look at New York itself.
Wow.
Yeah. So I just wanted to add that if you'll notice that what's pretty neat is that once you have the data, then you have the power to visualize it. So there, within ArcGIS Online, you can choose, say, I want to create an image or a chart based on these data variables. So for instance, one map that we worked on one time was showing the invasion of Russia by Napoleon, and then, you know, the historical map where his troops decrease. We created a bar graph to show that, and kids can visually see just how many troops he lost as he invaded and returned back to Europe. So it's really powerful on two levels. One, if we make it for the students, but it's really powerful when you switch it over and say you make the visualization based on the data you found.
And as I frequently tell my students, every map has a hypothesis. You just need to figure out what the map maker was trying to communicate. So in our introduction, I mentioned the fact that we have a fairly rich bibliography. And this is at the end of every story map, it is in the item details page. And I'm going to item details page here live. So the sources are presented in the order that they appeared in the story map. So we have pictures, we have cartoons, and this is a little different than what happened in the story map. Okay, I've picked the only one that doesn't open. Fine, open a new window. That it takes you to the Library of Congress's bibliographic page that it's thinking about, and then you can download it from there. Okay, it's going to take a little while to load. And so, Chris, what can you say while we're waiting for it to load?
Well, what I can say, folks, is one thing is that we joke around, but Georgeanne really was our GIS Jedi for this project. She was Yoda. She made a lot of things happen that we didn't think were possible. The teachers designed the story maps and gave it the best try they could. They're just not GIS professionals. And so they would hand the maps over, and then Georgeanne, because she's retired and has more time to work, really took the time to make sure these are ADA compliant. They also are properly sourced and connect people not just to the map and say, oh, that's a neat source. It really allows them to go to the source, which for this project, 90% of the sources came from the Library of Congress websites. Periodically, we had to find a few from other museums and agencies just to fill the story. But we really wanted to showcase and connect people to our nation's library and to the Teaching with Primary Sources teaching guide. So when you download the teaching guide, you'll see that we took a number of the TPS graphic organizers and customized them to best fit a story map. So instead of writing them from left to right, we created a top-down model so that as you work through the story map, on the left side, you have your questions, and on the right side, you answer questions so that it matches up with the story map apps. And we really want to share with you that what we found with the teachers and by blending the primary sources with the story map technology, the sky really is the limit. There's so many. It's such I like to call it accordion mapping. We can shrink it down if we want to, or we can expand it based on what our interests and what our goals are. That really became the case with the island hopping project. As the teacher, Scott Mace, he's a teacher of U.S. history at Charlottesville High School here in Virginia, as he was working on this story, and he wanted to know about it because of his father's experiences in World War II and being in the Pacific. He wanted to better understand it. And he knows that you see these maps with island hopping. But we thought of how can we bring together all these different tools and put them all together. And then we realized that in ArcGIS Online, there's an option to connect origins to destinations. And the destination when it was island hopping was Japan. So Georgeanne, I'm going to put you on the spot to open up this map and maybe show them how the island hopping project works.
Yep, I got it open. I just
All right.
to the right place. Come on, map, go there. Okay, so here is island hopping, and every single battle is rich with primary sources. And it has for each of the battles how many were killed for each side. But the author wanted to focus on distance. So we can make distance. So here is our layer. I've always wondered why Midway is called Midway, and there it is. So I asked the computer to pretty please calculate distances from Midway, and look at that. It is midway across the Pacific. And each of these lines will give the distance from Midway to the islands, so you can get an idea of where they're located. But probably the most powerful image is that of the Japanese battles. So distance from Tokyo. So you can see for these various lines how far their scope of influence was and the distance from their home base. So just an incredible tool and very, very many rich resources. And maps can also make a chart. So there is one for this one, but this one works a little bit more painlessly, is you have a map, and our map is showing the number of war dead. And we can have the legend, which will give us the key as to which countries lost people. Because in war, people die. But the infographic lets us compare the different battles. So it'll show for each country at the end of the war the civilian deaths, the military deaths, and the relative numbers and the total death. And I think the infographic is just an incredible way to look at information. Hey, Chris, comments?
No, I think you've shown that think of just all the different ways we visualize the data. And I noticed many people are like, what does the data look like? The data truly is, it's a spreadsheet of information. It's rows and columns, and the rows are the features you see on the map. So in the case of Scott's map with, can you go back just a slide?
I am.
Yeah.
I'm thinking I want to go to the live map.
So although you can't, actually, if you went to the live map, can we bring up a data table on a map just so they can see?
Absolutely.
Yeah, why don't we bring up one map so they can see when we're talking about data, how does the eye in GIS fit with this
Okay,
what they're seeing?
Only do this on the app, but there is our data table. This is driving the map. Oops. So we've got the distance, the battles, the world physical, and it was there, but now it's thinking about refreshing itself.
Yeah, so a lot of ways that I like to just think about data is think about if you've ever used a Google form in your classroom and you're creating, you're getting information. It's anything. It can be they're filling out a quiz and you get a table of the student's results. So you got a student's name and then their results. The power of a GIS data is you also have to have locations. That location can be another 2 columns of latitude and longitude, or you can have a column of addresses. So imagine you've got all your test results. They filled out this quiz, and you've got a student's name, but then you place the address in the column as well. You can say map the results by student location. And you might be able, I mean, I'm saying in schools, you could start to analyze geographic patterns of results or areas that might need more remediation or more enrichment. But in the case of this map, we went and we found the latitude and longitude for where the battle occurred, put the date in there, and then once we had the battle, we then can do the analysis because we had points of origin and then the destination, and then Georgeanne conducted the GIS analysis to show the lines and how, as you got closer to Japan, casualty rates went up.
And so using one data table, you can symbolize and represent the data a variety of ways.
Right.
And then the Library of Congress has been busy too, making story maps. And this page needs to think about loading, which is not going to right now. So Chris?
Yes?
Shall we go to the design principles?
We should go to the design principles, absolutely. So what drove this TPS Eastern project? First, we embrace the teaching with primary sources technique. Some of you have asked what type of training the teachers went through. We put them through. They chose to go through some online training, a course that VGA offers called Putting Social Studies in Its Place, that is free of charge to teachers in Virginia and, depending on funding, outside of Virginia as well. It's all online. We also put them through an online training of the teaching with primary sources techniques and went to a number of the online modules that TPS and TPS Eastern provide. And then we brought them together for a workshop for 2 days at the University of Virginia. So teaching with primary sources techniques were right there at the heart of what we wanted to pull off.
And then having teaching techniques, unless you have authentic sources, won't be as powerful. So part of the work is based on historical thinking and the different stages of it, such as sourcing, collaboration, contextualization, and close reading, as well as the observe, question, and reflect.
Yep.
And those were at the heart of the questions that are crafted in the lesson plan.
Yeah. And then, because teachers are the best folks to inform you of instructional design, we followed their lead and we used the Storymap journal format. As you could probably see with the variety of story maps we showed you, it's a really nice interactivity between text and then multimedia, whether it's online images or online mapping.
Okay, and in terms of the electronic resources, there are oodles of them. Even though we didn't get to demonstrate them today, there are movies from the collection, there are audio files, as well as the static images and political cartoons.
Yeah. And right there, as you can see, we are the Virginia Geographic Alliance, but really you can't separate geography and history. In order to really, truly dive into historical thinking, you have to recognize and appreciate and understand the interplay between geography and history. And so using the GIS maps and the primary sources and tagging them, we really felt like we could bring them together to provide geographic context. And between Georgeanne and I, we get giggly and really happy when a teacher says, "How could I map this?" And we're like, "Please, let us show you the way."
And the maps and the apps, as you can see, are interactive. So we'd like students to think what question they would like to pose to the map, and then what tools they have on the map that can help them answer the question.
Yeah.
And the real aha is when the students say, "Ooh, what about?" And it's like, go get that data.
Yeah. And speaking of going to get that data, it meant we had to follow the inquiry process. And I'm sure it's the same with many of your other school divisions, if not all of them. It's not that you can always do a full 5-point inquiry process lesson with your students, but we need to make sure that we're placing these inquiry nuggets in every lesson. Sometimes we're starting with the authentic question, and then the teacher has gathered the information, evaluated it. Now we're just asking our students to analyze and act on it. Other times, we've done everything up to the action. The goal here was to make sure that we follow the inquiry arc to provide the most authentic learning opportunities and teaching opportunities for teachers and students.
And with the lessons and ideas, everything is sort of done for the, not done for the teacher, because you still need to make instructional decisions, but we've taken some of the onerous work, like going to find the sources, going to assemble them in a story map. Okay, Chris, anything on Take a Break?
Yeah, finally, just with Take a Break, the bottom line, the goal is how do we get these maps and resources into students and teachers' hands? And we realized we wanted to reduce as many barriers as possible, or variables, because we do respect and recognize the realities of being a classroom teacher these days. And so the real goal was that you can take this and you can take it as it's written, or if you have the time, you can customize them to best match your classroom and your school and your needs.
Okay, I now have the Library of Congress's story map page, which you could reach by searching for story maps. They did a little different approach. Ours has a story map journal with a main stage. They used a cascade, which is absolutely visually appealing to showcase maps and the narrative that is in their collection. So don't forget to look at these two. Little different approach, but outstanding visuals. And that concludes what we have to say. Thoughts or questions?
Well, the questions were pouring in. Thank you, Georgeanne and Chris. Josh, do you have the most pressing questions ready?
Yes, I do. Here's the first one. Is there a way to reference the source of the data?
So we have reference in the end of the story maps. We do cite where the data came from. With a lot of this data, some of it was truly getting our hands dirty and doing historical work and finding it and researching it and putting it into a spreadsheet. In other cases, there is a website out there called the National Historical GIS out of the University of Minnesota that has GIS files and data tables for every U.S. census since 1790. You do have to understand some GIS to make the files work, but that's where we found a lot of the census data. In other cases, the teachers and ourselves would put Google Sheets up online, and we'd work together to plug in the data, and if we needed to make some technical adjustments, we would. Georgeanne, do you want to add anything else?
Yeah, we have the citation for many of the maps that use the National Historical GIS. And for every map, and of course I need to double check, there should be an item details page which lists the source of the data.
One of the other questions that came in was whether historical sites would be eligible, that do education programs would be eligible for the ESRI packages. Chris, do you know the answer to that?
I understand that you are eligible for a nonprofit rate, which is at a greatly reduced rate. The K-12 license is specifically targeted for K-12, but I can tell you that I do understand that periodically exceptions are made, particularly if you are working directly with schools, and they might have you make some agreements as to you will only use this for educational purposes, not for any work within your agency for other things. I think that's where they get a little cautious with organizations. It's if somebody in another office says, wait, you got GIS, can we look at where our visitors are coming from? Which you could do that, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's a conversation you'd have to take up with the ESRI Education Department and see what they would say to you.
Thank you. Josh, do you have another question?
Yes. What role can museums and cultural institutions play in the creation of these story maps?
I think a great role to partner with schools, to partner with alliances like the Virginia Geographic Alliance, and think of what collections and gems do you have that the story could be told better with your collection. The story could be told better if it was mapped in a story map. So I think that these are definitely tools that can help get museum resources into classrooms, and in many ways think about making it a virtual field trip that aligns with classroom standards, classroom goals, etc. Georgeanne, do you have some thoughts?
No, that sounds really good. The power of the story map to showcase the sources and anything that can be done to simplify the prep time that teachers need to take to assemble them on their own.
So another question here. Can you explain a quick example of how to make these story maps ADA compliant?
For every image that's in a story map, there is a opportunity, and for every single map, to enter a caption for a screen reader. The only ones that right now are supporting that are the story map tour, where we went from picture to picture and it hopped on the map. And so to compensate for that, there is a document listed in the sidebar, which has the captions for all of the images that are included in the story map tours. You need a rather sophisticated screen reader that a blind person would have. Your normal screen reader is not quite swift enough to keep up.
Is it still possible to take the online courses, putting social studies in its place?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So we are still offering putting social studies in its place. It's a 5-week course. The end result is that you learn about WebGIS, and at the end you make your own story map. We will be offering another one probably in the fall of 2019. The best thing to do is, there are a couple things. If you're into social media, follow the Virginia Geographic Alliance on Twitter. Follow the Virginia Geographic Alliance on Facebook. We do make announcements there. I'm also happy to follow me at AHSGEO, AHSGEO, and we'll be make sure that you get the announcement when it's available, and it will be free of charge.
And Chris, we'll promote it through the TPS Eastern Region for you too.
Yeah. Let me correct my Twitter. Just it's not AHSGO. There we go.
There you go.
All right, no problem.
And then, even though it'll be in the recording, I have visible now the link to the website that houses the teacher materials and links to the primary source.
So a couple more questions here. Is there a way that these story maps can be shared, in other words, to make them part of OER?
What's OER?
Open educational resources, right? I think that's what it means. We haven't explored that. I do know that everything we've created is free through Creative Commons. So I know if you are interested in getting started in GIS as well, Esri has a collection of activities called Geo Inquiries. They are 15-minute to 20-minute activities that you walk through a ready-made GIS map and teach benchmark topics in everything from earth science to American history, world history, and human geography, and world history as well. So that's a place to get started, and all of those activities were published under Creative Commons. Where it gets a little sticky is that Esri is a private global company, and so there might be some limits to going OER with it, given the software that we're using. The nice thing is they are very generous, though, and again, any K-12 school can have access to it.
And all the links to the story maps we have created are public, so you would share the link with somebody so they could access the story map.
Okay. So do you have any advice about quality control of student projects?
My first one is aim small, miss small. So start with baby steps with these activities. You can set up a nice rubric and limit some things. Set up set up a portfolio of 7 to 10 items that you'd like for teachers or students to have in their maps, and limit it. And then if they finish that, allow more. So I think the first time you start to use a story map or even make maps, if you aim small, you'll miss small. So I think, and then you're going to notice that your kids are going to pick this up faster than you, and you're going to have some teaching assistants that will help you out. And I love the fact that so often it's not the traditional student that's doing great in a classroom. Some of your tech savvy kids, they're not the strongest readers, but man, they can make a map and they can understand data better than most of us.
And one of the elementary teachers that I work with, the kids got so into finding images, they neglected their literary skills of complete sentences and spelling and capitalization. So before they could finish their story map, they had to give her written proof of their mastery of the English language. So in a way, that was her quality control.
That's the way to tie it together, Georgeanne.
Mm-hmm. Interdisciplinary.
Yeah. Chris, I think you mentioned it once before, but can you tell us how long the training was that you put your teachers through?
Oh, okay. So the teachers were required to go through the Putting Social Studies in Its Place course, and a number of the teachers that applied had already taken the course. They didn't have to take it a second time. We did have one new teacher who we said, we'd like for you to go through the online course first. So we kind of staggered the launch of the program to be after a fall offering. So the teacher that joined the program went through it with an open classroom with other teachers. We then put them through a 3-week online Teaching with Primary Sources course. Our course was offered through Longwood University. Longwood University provided the teachers with guest student access to their learning platform, which is Canvas. And we developed the course in which we introduced them to the Library of Congress, the resources that are there. We then walked them through the different graphic organizers and walked them through one of your pre-made getting PD activities. I think it was the one with the Wadzi-Muller map. We had them walk through online and think of other ways that they could use that technique. We then showed them the last week was to show them existing projects and the tools that they've developed, and to help critique which ones do you believe would best fit story maps and which ones would not. And then we brought them together for a 2-day face-to-face training at the University of Virginia, in which we did some troubleshooting and tips and tricks on some new techniques that you wouldn't have received in the online course, and also came to an agreement on the topics that we'd want to cover. And we also came to agreements of which techniques do we definitely want to have in the story maps. And then we spent the afternoon just brainstorming what would be the geographic elements that we could tie to these events. And then we let the teachers work independently for about 3 weeks. And then we started we called them PLCs, and we assigned 2 advisors to 1 teacher. And we met a couple of times to talk through their ideas, to analyze their project proposal. And then after about 6 weeks, they finished their projects, and we put them through a peer review where the teachers became the peer reviewers of each other's lessons to say, this does make sense, this doesn't make sense. And then we came together for a mid-year online meeting to showcase the first story maps. And then we went to round 2, which followed the same thing. We also learned what we did need to spend more time on and what we needed to spend less time on, made adjustments. And then we literally handed these over to Georgeanne, who for 6 to 8 weeks was quiet. I thought she'd moved to a cave somewhere with no internet connection. And then she came back and started meeting with the teachers one-on-one to say, here's what you're going to have done. I can't speak highly enough to how the project is successful for all the elements you've mentioned. Teachers being trained as leaders, the Library of Congress support, but these maps aren't as good as they are without Georgeanne literally being a phone call or a click away to make sure these teachers support. I mean, the support was often in real time. If a teacher was stuck, they'd say it was amazing. It was fixed within 2 hours, because we understand that teachers' time, they don't have the flexibility that a lot of people do. So Georgeanne's responsiveness was key to this project.
And it really shows. Congratulations on a project. Very well done, folks. We're getting down to the end of our time. I want to ask you all, I posted a link in the chat box for a webinar evaluation. We'd love to know what you thought of this one, and if you have ideas for our next one. There are a few more questions coming in. We'll try to I see Chris is answering them as we go. Teachers were paid a stipend and received CEUs, but excellent work. We'd appreciate you, again, filling out the webinar evaluation. We'll be announcing our next webinar soon. This program was recorded, and it will be shared with you probably tomorrow or Monday, and we'd encourage you to share it with your colleagues. The Virginia Geographic Alliance, Chris and Georgeanne, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Our pleasure.
Yeah, job well done.
Thank you very much for having us today.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. All right, folks, please fill out that evaluation. We'll see you next time. Have a great day.